Welcome to the CNR Perspective YouTube channel. Brave Ukrainian warriors have launched a fierce operation against the enemy as the week draws to a close. Ukrainian forces reported that they damaged a floating bridge over the Seam River in the Kursk region of Russia in a high-mobility artillery rocket system, HIMARS, attack during an ongoing cross-border operation. A video released by the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces shows the moment a cluster munition fired from a HIMARS rocket hits a temporary floating bridge on the banks of the same river in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian military has frequently used U.S.-supplied HIMARS missiles in the war, often targeting Russia's most advanced anti-aircraft missile systems. After Ukraine deployed troops and armored vehicles to the Sumy region, fierce fighting broke out in the Kursk region in northeastern Ukraine. Kiev forces quickly seized control of Russian territory as Moscow scrambled to deploy additional resources to the region from Ukraine's frontline regions. The Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces issued the following statement. Kiev forces conducted a successful operation to destroy a significant number of enemy personnel using HIMARS in the area. These troops were gathering in order to prepare for offensive actions against the positions of units of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Unmanned Systems Forces said that the equipment enabled them to effectively hit the enemy not only on the front line but also in deep rear lines, changing the course of hostilities and bringing our victory closer. In its latest analysis of the conflict in Ukraine, expert analysts in the field noted that Kiev forces hit several Russian pontoon bridges over the Seam River in August. The bridges were used as an important supply route during Russia's offensive against Ukraine's Kursk. Ukraine has so far reportedly taken control of some 1,294 square kilometers, 500 square miles, of Russian territory and 100 settlements. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Kursk by October 1st. Officials said that Russian authorities have ordered the addition of the Russian 106th Airborne Division to the region, and may begin redeploying forces with more combat experience to support ongoing Russian counterattacks and future counteroffensive operations against Ukrainian forces in Russia. The officials continued as follows. The Russian authorities said that with Russian forces continuing their counterattacks against Ukraine's Bulge, the 106th VDV Division and other units with more combat experience may be concentrated in the Kursk Oblast. After all this, there was another important development. Britain has privately decided to allow Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles supplied by the UK for long-range strikes deep into Russia. Kiev has long argued that restrictions on the use of long-range weapons are hampering the war effort. Washington, on the other hand, claims that allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory with its weapons could escalate the situation. At a joint press conference in Kiev, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said Russia was responsible for escalating the war. The visit to Kyiv came a day after Washington confirmed that Iran had delivered ballistic missiles to Russia. Blinken said this gave Moscow additional capability and additional flexibility in the war. In response to a question about whether U.S. President Joe Biden would change his policy on long-range strikes, which he has reportedly considered in recent weeks, Blinken responded cautiously, saying that the United States has been willing to flexibly change its strategy from day one. We will continue to do so, Blinken said, and did not comment specifically on a possible policy change on Storm Shadow missiles. Such a decision could be made behind closed doors or unilaterally by the UK. However, expert analysts have noted that Blinken and Lammy's visit to Kiev will not take place without a change in policy on the use of Storm Shadow missiles. No explicit announcement of a policy change is expected to be made while Blinken and Lammy are in Kiev. Ukraine has used Storm Shadow missiles with a range of up to 250 kilometers, 150 miles, to strike Russian military targets in Crimea, a sovereign Ukrainian territory illegally annexed by Russia. Officials reported in August, citing unnamed sources, that the UK was in favor of allowing Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles in strikes against Russia, but refrained from publicly pressing for such a policy change for fear of a backlash from the United States. Meanwhile, the Pentagon says it has about $6 billion in funding left for Ukraine, but that funding could expire at the end of this month unless Congress or the State Department acts to expand the military's authority to send weapons from its stockpile to Kiev. Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder issued the following statement. There is $5.9 billion left in the Ukrainian presidential withdrawal authorization, all but $100 million, of which will expire at the end of the fiscal year. The ministry will continue to provide withdrawal packages in the near future and is working with Congress to extend PDA authorizations beyond the end of the fiscal year. A defense official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said Congress's months-long gridlock in passing a supplemental funding bill for Ukraine has been a contributing factor in billions of dollars in weapons spending going unspent. The money was expected to be allocated to Ukraine last year, but the U.S. House of Representatives failed to pass a $95 billion foreign aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan until late April of this year. About $61 billion of that was earmarked for Ukraine. The official said the delay left the Pentagon with less time to identify military aid from its stockpiles and send it to Kiev. The remaining funding of about $6 billion is less than 10% of the aid allocated in April to address the conflict in Ukraine. Sabrina Singh, the Pentagon's deputy press secretary, said earlier this month that the Pentagon will use everything we can to continue to provide Ukraine with what it needs in both the short and long term. We're in a long-term struggle with Ukraine, Singh said. Mykola Murskij, advocacy director for the NGO Ukraine Razom, said there are two ways to ensure that access to the remaining funds does not expire in early October. First, Congress needs to approve it again. This would require lawmakers to pass a provision that would extend the authority to use the remaining amount in the next budget year. Lawmakers in both chambers of Congress supported expanding the authorization so that all funds allocated to Kiev could be used. Adam Smith, the senior Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, said that if we need to extend it, we will. Mike Lawler, a Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, added that if not all of the funds were spent by the deadline, he would work to make it happen. According to Murskij, the second way to ensure that the military has access to the remaining funds is for the State Department to notify Congress of its intention to use the funds. In this case, legislators would not have to vote on the extension, but the official notification would have to be made by the Secretary of State, as has been done in the past. A State Department spokesperson declined to comment on whether an extension would be granted, saying that there would be no discussions with legislators and their staff on communications, but that the United States would continue to coordinate closely with Congress on the steadfast support that the United States, our allies, and partners around the world are providing to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia's premeditated, unprovoked, and unjustified war. Murskij said the advocacy group is working with members of Congress to extend the funds. Murskij continued, "But I will not put all my eggs in that basket, because it is very difficult to predict what Congress will do, and there is always the possibility of a last-minute setback." In a letter to the administration, members of pro-Ukrainian civil society organizations said that expanding these funds would send a strong message to Ukrainian, Russian, and American voters that the administration wants Ukraine to win. Thank you for tuning in.